3.1, 3.15, corrected, and 3.17. 3.15.
Yes, item 3.15, approve a budget adjustment to the city council budget. Mayor, we have 49 e-comments.
49.
49.
Okay.
We'll start with Irvine resident. There is so much hypocrisy around this item. Mayor Shea made herself a movie star with her Mayor's Corner videos. How much did the city of Irvine spend on producing those? How much was budgeted? When did the city council approve it? Leslie Tan wants a city council special study session on her special interest. How much will the city spend on that? Who is paying for all the staff time she is burning? These comments are from people with a political agenda and should be ignored. Pam Smith, Mike Carroll needs to pay back everything he stole from the city, all 70,000 plus. Take this off the consent calendar, and the district attorney and attorney general need to investigate this. It is a true crime. Carol Burns, this is most definitely not allowed by the generally accepted accounting principles, which is why you probably didn't seek or receive the signature of the Financial Management and Strategic Planning Department. You may have received high marks on your audit this time around, but this will certainly not be the case in a year if you approve this consent calendar. Shifting monies like this is unacceptable. Shauna Sammy Nathan, the issue has become embarrassing and shameful to the city. Budgets exist just for that reason, to allocate funds for specific things, not to have a slush fund that can be used at will. Carroll needs to pay back the money, simple as that. Otherwise, you will have city funds being used for unintended purposes again. Just pay back the $72 and move on. Branda Lynn, the public has yet to receive a review of misappropriation of funds by Vice Mayor Carroll. The fact that Mr. Carroll is looking for ways to make adjustments to cover $30,000 out of the $70,000 he misused indicates an awareness of wrongdoing per Section 7 of Resolution number 19-57. Instead of using more tax dollars to repay the money, as Mayor Shea stated, he should personally repay the funds. If we turn a blind eye to such behavior, what type of precedent and messaging are we sending? Jing Sun, it is appalling that this is a hidden consent calendar item. Who put it on the consent calendar? It is appalling if the council lets Carroll get away with grand theft of taxpayer funds. Anonymous resident, this budget adjustment to the city council should have been requested and approved before Vice Mayor Carroll spent $30,964.46 in excess of the budgeted amount in the city council mail and postage accounts for the current fiscal year 2020 to 2021. Can the interim city manager explain why Vice Mayor Carroll has a $90,107.69 CEA allocation for the entirety of fiscal year 2020-2021 when his current term ends prior to the end of the second quarter of fiscal year 2020 to 2021? Kev Abazagian, please do not attempt to hide what may be a misappropriation of public funds via a reallocation ex post facto in this council budget adjustment. This would encourage future abuses of public funds for election-related purposes or other matters. The only proper course of action is the removal of Councilmember Mike Carroll from office voluntarily or involuntarily for his abuse of our public trust and our city's resources. Irvine resident, the complaints against Mike Carroll are meritless. Mike's communications via mail and town hall meetings were invaluable during the coronavirus outbreak. The people commenting negatively are all political opponents, not advocates for the city of Irvine. It is very sad that they continue to use knowingly false words when really they are just trying to attack him personally. Nothing was done wrong. Communication is good. Please vote yes, and let's move past the election to the real issues. Richard Murphy, I oppose this resolution to transfer funds as Mike Carroll will be retroactively legitimizing his misappropriation of $70,000 for his election campaign. The spend by Mr. Carroll requires investigation and restitution, not whitewashing as the council is attempting to do. We need to know the names of the people who aided in this funds misuse and who approved it. Gene Kaplan, I greatly disapprove of this backroom deal to absolve Mike Carroll of his illegal and unethical use of city funds and city employees to promote his election to the city council. Putting onto the consent calendar is the dirtiest type of politics and flies in the face of transparency you people say you promote in our local government. Put some sunlight on this item so the general constituency can have its voice heard before you go ahead and rubber stamp the actions of a thief. Ed McNew, Mike Carroll spent $72,000 for taxpayer-funded mailers without the required approval of City Council and should repay the entire amount. If the other members approve his request, then in my opinion, they are as guilty as he is. I think this is another issue of council corruption. Remember, Mayor Shea withdrew her endorsement for her appointment for appointed council member Mike Carroll over this issue. Lenore Roush, I do not agree with transferring money as described by this proposed budget adjustment. Patricia Kennedy, this is simply a cover-up of illegal use of city funds by a city official. The entire matter should be turned over to the proper authorities for legal action against that city council member. Steve Berger, Mike Carroll should not be allowed to obfuscate and cover up his $70,000 plus misconduct with a blithe and cavalier budget adjustment without a full public hearing before the full new city council. This issue should be fully heard and considered by the new city council in early 2021. This budget adjustment item is unlawful and shameful and should be soundly defeated and rejected if it is not withdrawn. Janice Morris, I am having difficulty making sense of Councilperson Carroll's original action and subsequent behavior. Can this be a parody of an I Love Lucy episode? You know, when Lucy buys something she can't afford, so she hides it from Ricky. Then she realizes Ricky will find it eventually, so she puts it in plain sight, disguises it, and tells Ricky it's something it plainly isn't. Ricky goes ballistic and everyone laughs. Well, I'm not laughing since this is $70,000 of taxpayer money. Ernestina Benson, I strongly oppose allowing Mike Carroll to legitimize his misappropriation of $70,000 to fund his election campaign. This is beyond shameful. Catherine Daigle, Mr. Carroll states his plan was to use portions of his $90,000 staff allocation to pay for the mailers by laying off his staff to connect with Irvine residents. Families lost their homes and jobs. Children went without school lunches because of IUSD school lunch closures for COVID-19. Carroll laid off his staff to fund his personal political campaign. This is sheer arrogance that you seem to be above it all. Let them make cake, I say, the realities of life for the unfortunate. John Wu, Carroll stole the personal data of citizens without their permission. Carroll also went against the State Government Code 8, which bars the utilization of public funds for campaign activity. He should serve 4 years in the state prison and may also be disqualified from office. Kevin Leanne, MD, our government needs to be open and transparent with integrity and honor. Our public institutions, including our elected officials, must be subject to public scrutiny and oversight. Anything less demands change. There needs to be a viable method for discovery and open discourse. Susan Sayer, hiding on the consent calendar, Councilmember Carroll's request resolution to transfer funds to cover his misuse of public funds shows lack of transparency. Carroll should personally refund the money. Voting to approve the transfer of funds will show the public and future voters that your decision-making lacks honesty and accountability. Furthermore, as this agenda item serves to cover his misdeeds, Councilmember Carroll should recuse himself from discussing and voting on this agenda item. Jane Roshman, I strongly suppose the transfer of city money to cover up Mike Carroll's use of city funds for his personal campaign for city council. This is a cover-up, and many people in Irvine are aware of this and recognize how wrong this is. It is shameful that it is even being considered. Please do not pass this. John Wu, Carroll collected personal data of citizens without their permission to send mailers in an out-and-out violation of law. He has gone against the State Government Code 8, which bars the utilization of public funds for campaign activity. An investigation would surely find him deserving of punishment under Section 424 of the Penal Code. This means the wrongdoer would have to serve 4 years in the state prison and may also be disqualified from office. Why are you allowing Carroll to get away with this? Jerry Kaplan, Mike Carroll needs to come clean and take responsibility for this misappropriation of funds. Phil Braden, Vice Mayor Carroll should not be given a free pass on this. He is requesting to rob Peter to pay Paul. The money in the council executive aid account was never meant to cover his fraudulent use of $70,000 of mail and postage services for his campaign. He must be held accountable. Any member voting to approve his use of the CEA account is as dishonest and crooked as he is. If he is allowed to bend this rule, what else is he willing to do to have the rest of the council sweep under the rug? Phil Braden, this was already read. June Lee, Carroll collected personal data of citizens without their permission to send mailers as a violation of law. It goes against State Government Code 8, which bars the utilization of public funds for campaign activity. Why and how is there no investigation? Carroll is deserving of punishment under Section 424 of the Penal Code. Under this, the wrongdoer would have to serve 4 years in state prison and may be disqualified from office. Peggy Hertzen Rader, I'm so tired of local corruption. Avram Grossman, Mike Carroll used city funds to pay for his personal re-election emailing. This was not a city function, and therefore Mr. Carroll should pay for the cost for his campaign finances, not paid by the city of Irvine. Mayor Shea was opposed to Mr. Carroll's misappropriations, which I understand she has, of course, reversed. However, that does not make Mr. Carroll's misappropriation okay. It is not. He should pay back the funds, and the city council should not approve 3.15. Michelle Johnson, the proposed consent items need further investigation and disclosure to the public and should be pulled from the consent calendar. An independent investigation is needed to answer the question, 1, how is the full $72,000 in misappropriated funds going to be made whole? 2, what personnel were allocated the $90,000 and are they still employed? 3, what audit of the postal accounts have been completed? A full and complete audit and investigation and disclosure is necessary to the public. Melissa Masri, the agenda item states the transfer will eliminate the negative balance in the mail and postage accounts. Doesn't this imply that the funds have already been spent previous to approval by council members? According to the Voice of OC, under the city's own policy, which Carroll voted to approve in July of 2019, the staff funds cannot be used for anything other than salaries without the approval of the city council. This seems a violation of the policy and should not be retroactively approved. Henry Cass, against. No official should be allowed to use city funds for personal promotion. Carroll will be retroactively legitimizing his misappropriation of $70,000 for his election campaign, filling back up his negative mail and postage account by transferring in other city funds, but calling the item a budget adjustment. Remember, Mayor Shea rescinded her endorsement of her appointed councilmember Mike Carroll for misappropriating $72,000 of city funds for mass mailing. Leslie Tan, first of all, why is there a negative balance in the mail and postage accounts? It's not logical for someone to overspend by such a huge amount without knowing. We're not talking about $100 or even $1,000. Would you go around overcharging this amount on your credit card? It is your responsibility to know what you are allowed to spend in the limit. The public needs to know why this even happened, and whoever supporting this transfer before an acceptable answer is given needs to be voted out. L. Jordan, I oppose the budget adjustment, agenda item 3.15. Paul Belts, this is misuse of city funds, and Mike Carroll should not be allowed to cover it up after the fact. He needs to be investigated and held accountable for his actions. Sharon Toji, approving this item has the effect of approving Mr. Carroll's use of mailing funds, which are not intended to be used for campaigns for that purpose. Even Mr. Carroll's supporter, outgoing Mayor Christina Shea, acknowledged that his use was illegal and unethical by withdrawing her endorsement of him. Approving this item is not a simple budget adjustment, but a tacit approval of his misappropriation of the mailing fund. Arthur Strauss, this is corruption at the highest level. Mr. Carroll should resign and pay back the money he stole from the ITT. Scott Hansen, the California Fair Political Practices Commission says on its website it's okay for Councilman Carroll to have sent mailers. Go to FAQ section and he leaves the website. He sent them to more than 60 days prior to the election, and special rules don't apply. The city's policy about mailers is unclear. Perhaps the city can hire a council services manager, a position that existed during former Mayor Crom's 16 years of public service. Please figure out the bookkeeping of the mailers and move on. Jonathan Beer, just last meeting, the city council spent a significant amount of time discussing moving line items around to cover budget shortfalls. If it's not allowed for other departments, it shouldn't be allowed here. Sylvia Walker, remove the budget adjustment item on the consent calendar. It was inappropriate for this item to be included on the consent calendar. Anyone who participated in putting this on the consent calendar showed a lack of judgment and transparency. Carroll has a special interest in this matter and therefore should not vote on the item. This matter should be scheduled for a future council meeting and discussed thoroughly. Too many questions have gone unanswered at this point. John Irvine, this unorthodox spending of city funds excuse me, on mailers with an apparent campaign benefit for Mr. Carroll should be publicly discussed. Transparency for City of Irvine residents requires removing this item from the consent calendar. Deborah Greet, Mike Carroll committed a crime by using City of Irvine funds in the amount of $70,000 for his city council campaign. We, the City of Irvine, should not in any way pay for this. Please do not approve a budget adjustment to the city council budget. Indict him. William Allenbach, what Mike Carroll is doing, spending my money for his mailers, is illegal, immoral, and a disgrace to good government. He needs to pay the money back. He needs to pay the money from his bank account, not my taxes. The City of Irvine does not need more bad government. June Carrata, I hereby request public discussion to transfer funds to the general fund, from the general fund to the postage and mailing fund for the purpose of covering campaign mailing expense for Mike Carroll's. I am strongly opposed. It is highly unethical. Curtis Lane, I understand that Councilman Carroll wants to use a budget adjustment to transfer funds to his mail and postage account to help offset his unauthorized abuse of city funds for what amounted to campaign mailers. Approving such a transfer would amount to abetting the councilman's corrupt behavior. Mr. Carroll needs to bear financial responsibility for his misappropriation of funds, not city taxpayers through unanimous consent measures using fungibility tricks sheltered from public comment. Steve, I strongly oppose and request item 3.15 should be removed from the consent calendar. This is why people don't trust our elected officials. Cover up by remaining council members. Carroll should be made to repay my tax dollars. Elections are paid for by individuals who think a person has done a good job. Carroll should be prosecuted. Michael Schwager, I would like this item to be discussed in a public meeting. The mailers I received from Mr. Carroll during the recent 2020 election season were most of the what a great fellow I am genre and did not seem to provide any real information not available otherwise. I realize this practice is a common ploy at election time, but not a laudatory one. Using city funds for this purpose should not be allowed. Kat Paxton, do not believe the money should come from city budget. Taxpayer dollars, councilman should pay himself. Michaela Montaner, I am concerned that this agenda item serves to transfer funds to cover Councilmember Carroll's potential misuse of city mail funds for his personal campaign use. This budget adjustment does not belong on the consent calendar. Considering the widespread public interest and concern for this matter, the item should be discussed more transparently with all the facts around this misappropriation of money made public. D. Fox, what about the rest of the $72,000? Is the $30,000 being taken away from employee pay? It's not clear about the shifting around of funds. And why should the public trust Mike Carroll in the future from stealing money from the city? This guy cannot be trusted. Does the council even know about his past? He seems to skate by on the coattails of others. Less than half has been supposedly repaid. What about the rest if he has over $90,000 in whatever account that is used for? Repay all of it. And that is all, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so at this time, does anybody on the council want to address this at all? Councilmember Fox, I think you mentioned you wanted to say something.
Yes. Now, I think this matter is completely inappropriate to put onto a consent calendar, and I agree with many of the comments. I was advised when I brought this matter up that there was to be no investigation without a majority of the council, and of course, I am prohibited from agendizing by this council's policy. And we will take that up later, and I will discourage the council from continuing that policy. This is an attempted whitewash. We are by law a part-time council provided with a budget for personal staff so that we can do our job. So rather, a council member co-opted city staff and spent $100,000 plus of postage and city staff time. Now, our council had already approved a detailed budget, a line item budget, which had set aside approximately $10,000 for the entirety of the council to communicate with the public. And a council member, Mike Carroll, went directly to staff and had them spend tens of thousands of dollars personally. And it is not even usual for a staff member to be directed by a council member to do anything. We have a city manager government. So as a chief executive, which is what our council members are, clearly staff felt that they had to comply with these requests, and the pressure had to be enormous. So while the rest of the council was struggling through COVID to reach out with information to residents by using Zoom calls and emails and being very mindful of our budgets, we had tens of thousands of dollars diverted in city time just to raise a council member's profile. Now, we're being asked to go back in retrospect and fill in this budget gap. And ostensibly, the use is going to be the staff time and the staff budget that was personal to the council member for their appointed staff. Well, first of all, it was the staff that was appointed or brought in by the council member, Mike, who brought the data and the information to the mailroom. So, and as a new appointed council member, without even a campaign, where did this data come from? How much did it cost to obtain? We've never seen any of those numbers. So the only method I'm aware of to obtain residential information is through political databases or through expenditures of funds, for sure. And then my question is, so if these staff members who have now not been utilized anymore and have been let go, they were the ones who were doing the databases, the Excel spreadsheets, bringing it into staff, bringing in the information, and then creating these mailers. Were they paid? Were they paid with city dollars? Were they paid some other way? Were they not paid? I mean, there needs to be an investigation. It is unfortunate that that was not looked into. But, and we'll vote on this later, because as a council member, I did what I felt was what was important for me to do, which was to bring a report of this information and put it in the hands of the authorities. But I'm not here, I'm not able to even ask the questions or even agendize these matters previously. And so have it on consent calendar with no, I presume, no staff report. I mean, I would like to ask for these very appropriate questions to be answered. Number one, where did the data come from? Number two, why was it considered appropriate for a council member to instruct staff to go over budget by a factor of 10? And 3, what can we do to prevent, this kind of expenditure, particularly when we're in the midst of a pandemic? And if it's true that perhaps this new council member, Mike, didn't know that this was not appropriate and he thought he was entitled to do that, how do we put in place some ways to advise a council member on what is appropriate and how far they've gone over budget? So these are all questions that should be answered. I imagine that because this was on consent, there is no one available to give testimony, but if there are, I would ask that we can have these questions answered tonight. I certainly won't be supporting just sweeping it under the rug and filling a hole in a budget, because this points to real systemic problems, and I hope they're addressed.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple quick questions. Number one, just a statement really. We approve a budget, a 2-year budget, and within that budget, we approve a line item for mail for all council members, and I think the budget's between $8,000 and $10,000 a year. We approve it. We've all approved it at this dais, our budget. So we knew we don't need a policy. We already know what the policy is, and that's what we have to stick to the budget that we approve. So if we approve budgets and then don't remember what we approved, then we've got a serious problem. What I want to understand is, why are we only being asked to pay back $30,000 when the deficit is $70,000? I think one of the residents brought that up. That's been a curious concern of mine. So staff, can you answer that question, whoever I would turn to?
Mayor, I can answer that question. I'm going to separate fiscal years. The $70,000 amount is a combined amount that includes last fiscal year that ended on June 30th, as well as the current fiscal year. You may recall that on October 27th, staff came before you with information on last fiscal year. And at that time, we reported 2 things. One is the fiscal year is closed. We can't make any more adjustments. Secondly, the reason the fiscal year closed without any issues is because currently City Council's budget is under the city manager. That department, the city manager's department, was positive. And therefore, there was no way for us to correct that negative. However, I also mentioned to you at that meeting 2 additional points. One is, on a going forward basis, we will look at negatives at a line item basis. And I'll come back to that in a second. The second point I mentioned is, we recommend that with the new budget that starts in July, that you have separate budgets for each council person. That way, it's not the city manager who's in charge of that budget. It's you.
That's something you're discussing in February, you mentioned.
And we will be recommending that on a going forward basis as part of the new budget. Now, let me come back to the negative adjustment. Because I promised to you on October 27th that we will take care of negative line items in each department, this is why this item is before you. One additional caveat very quickly, if I may, Mayor. If you didn't have Resolution 1957 that requires your consent to move funds from the Council Executive Assistance account, if you didn't have that resolution in place, I could have done this administratively. And that's what every other department in the city does.
Well, it was in place last year in July when you closed out the books. And I don't mean to be critical, but when accounting has problems, audits, we have annual audits, and sometimes annual audits will find problems, and they make you fix them. They don't just wipe it away and say it doesn't matter, the books are closed. You have to fix problems in your budget. When you come in with an audit, they see a discrepancy, you have to fix it. So I have a concern about, even from that standpoint, that we're just saying, that doesn't matter. I think to make this end and finalize it, there should be a proposal to fill in that $70,000, and it just makes sense, because we're going around in circles. How many meetings we've had and kind of circled around all this? It may be of value, in my opinion, if you're going to do this in February, to let the new council deal with this, and maybe really get into, look at all these, our budgetary approvals that we've had. We have a resolution. We redid our resolution in July 2019, I believe, talking about very specifically what our requirements are as council members, what the requirements are of our staff, who can't be going into mailrooms. I've worked here 26 years. I have never put my foot in that mailroom ever, never. So I think that we do have protocols in place, but clearly they're not being followed. And so I would suggest that the new council that is coming on should really bring this up and address this in more detail in February. I think that's the appropriate thing to do. And we can't just be suggesting, I read an article, that we can just have a $100,000 budget and we do whatever we want with it. That's a slush fund. Council members should not have slush funds. They should have specific budgets for specific purposes. And that's just my personal opinion. The new council can decide differently if they choose to, but I just don't believe that that is going to lead us in a very positive direction, an accountability direction that I think the public would want to have us follow. So anyway, I appreciate you giving me that update. I understand your rationale. I understand how some of this is working. Some of it definitely has to be changed. But I do have a concern. There's only approval for $30,000 and not the full amount tonight. Thank you. Any other comments, or is there a motion to move this forward? Or?
I'll move the recommended action.
Is there a second? Councilmember Khan, do you want to second the motion or no?
I'll second the motion. However, I think what I would like to see is a report by staff on some details on exactly the budget that we have. I don't think it's clear to the public of the different budget allocations we have and how they're spent. So I will move this forward, but I would like staff to come back and maybe do a presentation explaining exactly how money is used by council members for what purposes, and just give us a better understanding, give the public a better understanding of how this works.
What works? I mean, the documents that we're supposed to follow and that we vote on and we know about? Was that what you were referring to? I'm not clear how what works.
No, Mayor, I'm talking about the council budget.
I'm sorry, the council, the council.
The council budget,
aid
through the mayor. I think I
specific-
understand the request, and we can come back to the council with the breakdown of the council budget.
Now I understand better what you're saying. Okay. So there is a motion, there is a second. Is there any further discussion? Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Fox,
No.
Councilmember Khan,
Yes.
Councilmember Quo,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Carroll,
Yes.
Mayor Shea.
No.
Motion carries 3-2 with Councilmember Fox and Mayor Shea voting no.
Thank you. Okay, so now we'll move to item 3.17.
Thank you, Mayor. Item 3.17, request to convene a closed session of the Southern California Association of Governments Regional Council regarding recommendations of regional housing needs assessment litigation